Hello again, my name is Michael.
And I'm Grace.
And welcome back to Disney Through the Ages.
On this show, my husband and I are watching every animated Disney movie in order, starting with Snow White and continuing, through the ages.
Then, after watching each movie, we'll come here to give a review and talk about whether these old classics hold up to modern standards, as well as seeing how Disney movies have evolved over the years. This week, we're watching Pinocchio, which is probably the hardest Disney movie to spell. Are there 2 N's, 2 C's? I don't think anybody really knows, except for Microsoft Word's autocorrect, I guess. What are your thoughts going into this movie, your expectations?
To be honest, my expectations are a little bit higher just because after rewatching Snow White, I really enjoyed that, and it was a really great movie. And so my expectations are a little bit higher since they were able to do so well with that movie. But at the same time, this is not a movie I grabbed off the shelf very much growing up, so the expectations are a little bit lower than they were for Snow White.
Yeah, and for me, I have higher expectations with this than for Snow White also, just because I remember more of this movie. I do have more of a nostalgia for it because this is one that I did watch more growing up. And so, I still remember the bits about the whale and Pleasure Island and things like that. So I'm definitely looking forward to Pinocchio. I'm expecting bigger things from it than I did with Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. All right, so with that out of the way, we'll go watch the movie and we'll be back to talk about it in just a moment. Bum, 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 bum. So I never knew that that's the Disney logo intro that they put on every single movie. I don't know why. I never realized that that's from Pinocchio, the When You Wish Upon a Star.
Yeah, it's that's the thing. They said the thing.
Yeah, they did the thing. Yeah, that was just really weird because I obviously I've heard the song before, but it's been so long since I've seen Pinocchio that I'd completely forgotten about that. So yeah, I guess let's start with a little bit of a recap of Pinocchio. Starts out, Geppetto makes a little wooden boy. He wishes that the little wooden boy could be brought to life. Wish is granted by the Blue Fairy, and then adventure ensues. So, any preliminary thoughts starting off?
So to start, I love the beginning intro where there's the storybook and it's opening, and that's the start of the story. It's just classic, and I love it. The whole credits at the beginning and the storybook, it's just nice, and I love it. And I don't think I realized that Jiminy Cricket is basically narrating the movie to you in a way, and so he's telling you the story, and so I thought that was really neat.
Yeah, I thought that was really good, and I loved it's a little minor thing, but I loved that they took the time and effort to animate this whole little scene of Jiminy Cricket opening the book and a page falling because he's too small to hold it open, so he has to move the candle over. It's just a cute little charming thing that I'm sure took a while to animate and do. It didn't need to be in there, but that's just Disney being charming and cute with their characters. But yeah, I know. I also never realized that it was Jiminy Cricket narrating, or at least it's been so long since I've seen the movie that I had forgotten that,
Yeah, this isn't one I watched this many times, so I just didn't remember those little details. And there's just a lot of those little details throughout the plot and the story. This is a very detail-oriented story. And so it was really interesting going back and watching it and picking up on those little details. I remember the overarching plot, but there's just so many little details, so many things I would say that they didn't have to animate, but they chose to, and it's just really cute and really adorable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm the same way. I remembered the plot, the overarching big plot points, a lot better on Pinocchio than Snow White or some other movies I haven't seen in a very long time. But like you said, the details, and I'm not really a detail person when it comes to movies anyway, and so it was a lot of fun going back and seeing this movie that I haven't seen in a very long time and remembering all those little details there. So starting off, I thought the Blue Fairy was awesome. She was just such a regal kind of character. I had completely forgotten about her, honestly. I just remember Geppetto wished on a star and Pinocchio was brought to life. But the Blue Fairy was just so regal, but also kind of adorable, laughing at Jiminy Cricket and Pinocchio and their antics and stuff.
Yeah, I completely agree. Like, she's very regal and just exactly how you'd imagine a blue fairy to be, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah.
But she's just a really interesting character, and to be honest, like, I didn't remember, like, she played such a pivotal role in the story.
Yeah, yeah. Especially, like, she comes back a couple of times and helps out. Like, when the iconic Pinocchio's nose growing is one of the things that people know about Pinocchio. When that happens, his nose grows out super long into a branch with the bird's nest in it, and then she shows up and talks to him. And she's so patronizing at that point, where Pinocchio's like, "No, I didn't do a bad thing at all." Out goes the nose, and she's like, "Really?" but then she helps him out with getting out of it, and she even said, "A lie keeps growing and growing until it's as plain as the nose on your face," which is just such a clever, cute little line that I had totally forgotten about.
Yeah, honestly, thinking about it, yes, Pinocchio is the title character, but the movie is the Blue Fairy. Like, without her, there's no movie. She brings Pinocchio to life, and then she gives him these steps that he needs to follow to become a real boy, and then when he's in a pickle, she swoops in and saves the day.
I think that's accurate, yeah.
Okay, and, speaking of that scene where she just kind of swoops in and saves the day really bothers me. It's just like, there's no good way to get out of it, and so then it's like, let's just have the Blue Fairy show up and just get them out of this jail.
Yeah, Deus Ex Machina in a nutshell.
Yeah, that's something that's just bothered me. Like, the plot for Pinocchio, I feel, is very original, but it's just not quite as enjoyable, because there's just little things like that bug me. They mess with my suspension of disbelief. It's like, oh, come on.
Yeah, and speaking of that, there's a couple of things where it's like, okay, I see what you did there. Like, in particular, Stromboli. When Pinocchio is doing the No Strings on Me dance at the theater and things like that, he finishes up, and Stromboli throws him in a cage. And then, if you couldn't tell Stromboli was a bad guy already, he takes an axe and throws it into a wooden doll, a wooden puppet. And so it's just like one of those things where it's like, Disney, you weren't sure we would know that Stromboli was a bad guy by the fact that he's kidnapping Pinocchio. You just really had to drive it home how evil he is. And it's like, it's a bit over the top. And it's a little bit pulls you out of the suspension of disbelief with how ludicrous it is.
Agreed. And also, that's one of the reasons, I think especially I didn't enjoy this movie as much as a kid. It all felt kind of disjointed, and then there's like 3 different sections to the story, and now that I'm like older, I can think about the fact that, oh, they're just using like Shakespearean storytelling of 5 acts. But when I was a kid, it's just like, well, this is boring and weird.
Yeah, I never really thought about that, but it kind of reminds me of Dr. Dolittle, where it's like an anthology of these stories about this character. Dr. Dolittle goes on an adventure to X place, X animal comes and visits Dr. Dolittle, that kind of thing. Pinocchio's the same way, where there's 3 specific big acts, which I didn't realize until about, I think probably 2/3 of the way through the movie. I had this epiphany of the Blue Fairy said that he would be a real boy when Pinocchio when he proved himself to be brave, truthful, and unselfish. And those 3 aspects that he needs to prove correlate perfectly to the 3 adventures that he goes on, because to be brave, well, he proves his bravery with Monstro the whale when he just rushes out the door to go save his dad without any thought for himself. Then truthful, when he was locked up by Stromboli, he lied and learned the hard way that the truth will set you free, literally in his case. And then with unselfishness, when he was on Pleasure Island, he was indulging in being selfish, but he learned that was not right, and he eventually escaped from there.
Yeah, it's really interesting, especially thinking about in that context, and it's like, oh, this makes sense. It's kind of funny how, like, a kid's movie, I don't want to call it a kid's movie, but a kid's movie like Pinocchio requires that much thought in detail, actually.
Yeah, I think Pinocchio comes from a time when, like you said, it's not necessarily just a kid's movie. it's an animated movie. They didn't know at the time that it would. I bet they probably knew that there would be more of a kid audience, but it also was intended for adults to enjoy. And also, I feel like kids had more of an attention span back then, you know? Like, if you read some old fairy tales or things like that, stuff like that tended to be a lot deeper in bygone days.
Yeah, agreed. And I just think about the fact that it's hard for even us to get through an entire movie without pausing to get up and go do something. Even if it, even if it's just like going to the bathroom or something like that. Like, it's hard to keep the attention span for that long, even for us now as adults. Going along with that, one of my main gripes is Jiminy Cricket, because he's supposed to be the conscience for Pinocchio, since Pinocchio doesn't have a conscience. But Jiminy Cricket kind of gets fed up with Pinocchio and just like writes him off. He's just like, okay, this is what you do. And then Pinocchio goes and does the opposite thing. And he's just like, well, fine. He's going to be an actor. He doesn't need me.
Yeah.
Whatever. Like,
yeah.
I'm like, come on, Jiminy.
Yeah, his conscience just totally abandoned him a couple of times. Huh.
Yeah, it happens again.
That.
Yeah, it happens again later on Pleasure Island. And he's trying to talk sense to him. And then Pinocchio's like, nah. And then, so he just walks away in a huff, like, huh. Fine, he doesn't need me. He can listen to what's-his-face, his friend.
Yeah.
I can't remember his name,
but... Was it Jack?
Something
it
like
Jack.
That would be really funny if it was
Jack. No, it wasn't Jack, because that was one of the things that I found interesting about this movie, is that Jiminy Cricket says jackass. And he means donkey. He doesn't mean it as a curse word. But since, like, I'm a little afraid to say it on the podcast because it's become a curse word. But it's a G-rated movie. So, but, I mean, it literally just means donkey. But it's weird that exists in a G-rated movie. Does that make sense?
Yes, it definitely does. Like, this is... As with Snow White, like, a lot of it was actually, like, pretty scary and pretty adult and pretty intense.
Yeah, when those kids were getting turned into donkeys on Pleasure Island. So, little boys are taken to Pleasure Island with the promise of a life of free beer and free cigars and playing pool and all the other evils of the world. And when they're there, they overindulge so much that they're somehow magically transformed into donkeys, which is what Jiminy Cricket means when he's saying you're making a blank of yourself.
To go off what you were saying, I think it's the beer that turns them into the donkeys.
Is that it?
Yeah, and I think the more, I'm not sure, but I think the more they drank, the more likely they were to turn into like a full donkey. See, like Pinocchio barely had any, so that's why only like his ears changed and like his tail formed.
See, I was thinking it was just like living this lifestyle of hedonism on this magical place of Pleasure Island is what led to it, and so Pinocchio just escaped while he was transforming, and so he lucked out and only had his ears and a tail.
I don't know. That sounds like a theory for you, Super Carlin Brothers.
Yeah.
What makes them turn into donkeys?
Yeah. How does Pleasure Island work? I would be fine with either Super Carlin Brothers or the film theorists, either one. If either of you are listening to our podcast, cover that.
Or if we actually have like a listener, suggest that to them.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. So, oh, I remember where I was going with it. Pleasure Island was absolutely terrifying when those little boys were turned to donkeys, and like some of them could still talk, and so they're crying for their mommies, and like it's an awful, horrible scene, and like, you know, the head people in charge of the place were like, this one can still talk, send him back until he's really transformed into a donkey fully, or whatever, you know. And so that's just, I mean, that was a terrifying scene. And then later on, Monstro the Whale is kind of scary too, where he's like charging at them and trying to eat them, and they're trying to swim away, which that's kind of funny because they know that Geppetto was swallowed by Monstro, and yet as soon as Monstro is trying to swallow them, they're swimming away in fear, which I just thought was kind of ironic. But I mean, I get it. A whale's about to eat you. Even if that's literally the intention of your mission, there's still a whale about to eat you, so you'd still probably be scared. But it just seemed kind of weird, you know.
Well, they knew if they were swallowed back, then they had nothing, because Pinocchio had burned up all the like resources they had.
Oh, no. I'm talking about Jiminy Cricket and Pinocchio when they first are looking for Monstro.
Oh.
It's hilarious. They're looking for Monstro. The whole point is to get Geppetto out of the belly of the whale. And then they find Monstro and they immediately try to run. It's It seems weird to me.
It does. It's just one of those little inconsistencies that pulls you out of your like suspension of disbelief.
Yeah, I literally wrote in my notes, why are they swimming away? Like, that was the goal.
Yeah, I wrote that too, because it's just like, wait, what?
But yeah, that does, like I said earlier, that Pinocchio and Jiminy Cricket going after Monstro shows Pinocchio's bravery right there.
But yeah, it is interesting. And one thing I had noted is that when Pinocchio dies and Geppetto's there and he's crying over him, that he says, "My brave boy," and that's the moment when he turns into a real boy.
Yeah, that's when the Blue Fairy fulfills her promise that he'll be a real boy when he's truthful, unselfish, and brave. He went through these 3 acts of the movie in order to be those things. And so when Geppetto called him brave, that was how he became a real boy in the end. One last thing that I skipped over too is the scene "No Strings on Me" was kind of inappropriate, and I didn't remember that. But like, there's all these different female puppets, and they're all kind of caricatures of different ethnic groups and nationalities, which that in and of itself is a bit problematic. Because they're all just pure stereotypes, but they're also kind of scantily clad and busty in some ways, and like they're all kind of hanging all over Pinocchio, and it's literally just a wood puppet being controlled by a puppeteer, but it still is kind of weird, all these little kind of risque puppets coming after Pinocchio, and Pinocchio's a little boy. This is a kids movie, and then the racial stereotypes aren't helping anything. So it's just kind of a weird. I can't remember if Pinocchio had that same disclaimer on it that some of the other movies, because I know some movies on Disney Plus have a little disclaimer of, this contains outdated cultural depictions or things like that. I don't think Pinocchio had that. But
I don't recall, but I will say, going off of what you just said, and part of why I think Disney movies have done so well is that they know ultimately their audience is the whole family and not just kids. And so I think some of those things that are definitely inappropriate, might more be there for the adults, and I think it will go over the kids' heads.
Yeah, that makes sense. Because a lot of movies nowadays, even Disney or not, like I know Shrek was a lot like this, where there's a lot of jokes that you get a little more when you're an adult, So, and Disney movies do have that too. Yeah. So I feel like No Strings on Me is a good transition into talking about the music of the movie. Obviously, the When You Wish Upon a Star is like the Disney song,
Yeah. A lot of these other ones I had definitely forgotten. Like, they aren't quite as memorable as some of the later Disney songs that I walk around the house singing all day, every day. But especially Frozen 2 right now.
Yeah.
But anyway, so these aren't ones, like, I'll be singing them maybe for the next week, and then they're just going to totally disappear from my mind.
Gotcha. Yeah. Really, even now, after just having watched the movie a little bit ago, I remember When You Wish Upon a Star, and I remember the one about you're going to be an actor.
It's an actor's life for me.
It's an actor's life for me, that's it. And then No Strings on Me. And other than that, I don't really remember much of the other songs. Just because I have a lot of other stuff in my head right now,
Yeah, the only other main one was the Give a Little Whistle, which is a really adorable song.
Yeah, that was a good one. Now, one thing I did know is that I think the songs and the soundtrack both fit really well with this movie. Like, the soundtrack does an amazing job of telling you what to feel. If you're in a scene that you should be scared, it's kind of scary music and very tense. Or if it's a happy scene, there's happy music going on. Or sad scene at the end when Pinocchio dies, it's like somber kind of music. I think they did a great job with that. And the songs themselves, like No Strings on Me and like Give a Little Whistle, I think they fit really well with the movie. It's not just characters randomly breaking into song. There's actually a pretty good in-universe reason for them to be singing at that moment.
Yeah, I would agree with that as well. And that's something I really appreciate about it. And also, something that is more unique about these songs is they're not trying to make it like a 2.5 to 3 minute song that's gonna maybe be played on the radio or can be played at an awards show or things like that. They're just making the songs whatever length they want, whatever length they need to fit in with the story.
Yeah, that's true. I hadn't thought about that, but I think a lot of these songs are probably shorter than what they would be if Pinocchio had been made today, because it doesn't have to be, you know, 3 minutes and 20 seconds to fit on the radio. Now, one little gripe that I had with this movie is the animation is not quite as clean. Whereas with Snow White, we talked about how the background and the foreground, everything looked so coherent. And I feel like in this one, it was a lot easier. Like you talked about, it's easier to see which things are gonna move just based on the style that they're animated, you know?
Yes, that's something that really, really bothers me because, again, it kind of goes along with that suspension of disbelief. Like, I know that Pinocchio is about to interact with that because it's animated slightly differently than the background or things like that. And it's a little jarring, I would say.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like there's a lot of situations where the background almost looks like an oil painting or something. It's like real detailed and it looks far away. And then something that's sitting on top of it, like a cuckoo clock, is much more cartoony. And you know that the cuckoo clock is about to strike one and pop open, just based on the way it looks. A weird thing about that, too, is I think Monstro is the opposite of that, where Monstro himself looks like a wood carving, or like a woodblock print type of thing. It looks like you're looking at an illustration of Moby Dick from a classic artist in an illustrated version or something. Which is interesting because Monstro is one of the moving parts. He's not the background, but he still has that background kind of feel to the animation.
I agree. And I think the biggest problem with it is in Geppetto's workshop. Because, like, a lot of the background is very detailed, like, with all of the music boxes and the clocks and the puppets. It's all very detailed. But it just doesn't look quite right. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I totally agree. And on the other hand, one thing that I thought looked really good was when Pinocchio and Jiminy Cricket are going underwater and they're interacting with fish and things like that. And the whole screen has like kind of a wavy shimmer as a fish floats by and bubbles are blowing and stuff. Like I thought that was really cool, giving that kind of believable animation to the underwater scenes.
Yeah, I agree. I really did enjoy like that whole underwater scene. It was done very well. It just really showed what they can do with animation even at that point. So it looked really nice.
So another scene that really sticks out in my head and has for years is there's a scene where Honest John and Gideon, the two anthropomorphic animals, which I got a problem with that, we'll talk about in a minute. But when they're hanging out with the big head honcho boss, and Gideon blows a smoke ring and then catches it and dunks it in his drink like a donut and takes a bite out of it. And it's just such a surreal, absurd, and hilarious little moment, which you couldn't get in a kid's movie anymore because you're not allowed to show characters smoking or drinking and stuff. So that's, I mean, obviously a bit problematic. But it's just, I remember that from my childhood. And as soon as that scene came on, watching it this time, I'm like, he's going to catch it and he's going to dunk it like a donut and it's going to be super cool. And it's just, and I love absurd humor like that anyway. You know, I grew up on Monty Python. And so, but yeah, that scene is just so well animated where the smoke ring and yeah, you get what I mean.
Yeah, I agree. They did really well with that. And also going along with what I know you're about to say is the animation of them. It's really strange because they are obviously animals, but we're supposed to treat them like a human. And I think that's probably just something they know their strengths. Their strengths are not animating humans at this point. You know, as we saw with Snow White, like Snow White and the prince didn't look quite as good as everybody else. And so having Pinocchio be a puppet, they were able to get away with a little bit more. So they were kind of playing to their strengths there, as well as I think that's probably why that Honest John and Gideon were also more animal-like because they would be easier to animate, probably.
Yeah, I have such a problem with the fact that there's two random talking animals in this movie. And we're just supposed to be fine with that, but then there are other animals that don't talk, and there's no other talking animals in this movie, unless you count the little boys turning into donkeys. But like, it's just weird that there's these two. I think they're cats or foxes. It's hard to tell. And they can talk, and everyone treats them like there's nothing different about that. But I think you're right. I think it has to do with they know that the animals are their strengths. Like Figaro was the star of the show in this movie. He's just
Oh my gosh.
such a treasure.
Figaro has to be my new favorite Disney cat. Figaro is just literally the best and it's the shining star of this movie.
He had such a great character arc too.
Yes, he went through this whole progression where at the beginning he was just this selfish, arrogant, total cat. And it's true.
Yeah.
And then he's like he's a jerk kind of to Geppetto and to Cleo the fish, and then he's also a jerk to Pinocchio. And then at the end when Pinocchio dies, Figaro's so sad, and then when he comes back to life as a real boy, Figaro just gets so excited. He does a backflip and kisses Cleo right on the mouth.
It is the most adorable thing there. Yeah, and they did a great job of that with animating the animals and stuff. And then also, I feel like the humans that are in this movie are more like caricatures in a lot of ways, which by exaggerating them, making them way more cartoony, makes it easier to pass them off as people because you're not trying to do a hyper-realistic person. Like Geppetto looks more like one of the dwarves than Snow White. You know, like he's kind of extreme in some ways, you know, the big round nose and things like that. And the other humans too, like the headed guy at Pleasure Island, very much a caricature of what a person looks like. And so I think that kind of goes along with what you were saying about, it's almost like when Pixar made Toy Story, because everything computer animated looked plastic. And so they were like, let's make a movie about toys so that it's, you know, more believable, working with what you know and working within your constraints to make something great.
Yeah, agreed. And then going back to kind of the initial point, I do think that Honest John and Gideon are foxes, and I think that's supposed to imply the fact that they're tricksy and sneaky and things like that.
Yeah.
I think that mostly sums it up. Were there any other things that you wanted to mention?
Not really. I also wrote down the always let your conscience be your guide, and then Jiminy Cricket just keeps leaving, which is so funny. But yeah, I definitely enjoyed Pinocchio as much as I was expecting to. Honestly, like I wasn't expecting it to be a 10, but I was expecting to enjoy it, and that's what I got.
One other note that I had is toward the beginning, there's all those clocks when the hour changes,
Yeah.
and all those clocks are super inappropriate.
Yes, I remember you mentioned that while we were watching it.
Yeah, because the one clock was a mom spanking a child, one was a man shooting a bird, and the other one was like a man trying to chop a turkey's head off, which is just scarring.
Yeah. I don't think those would be allowed in modern Disney movies.
Definitely not.
Yeah.
Not even non-Disney movies.
Yeah, honestly. So yeah, me personally, I think I would give this like a 7-ish, 7.5 out of 10. Like I enjoyed it. It was as good as I remember. Still not like one of my favorite movies I've ever seen or anything, but I thoroughly enjoyed it. And I had a few minor complaints with it, but everything, there wasn't anything I couldn't get past that just broke the deal for me.
Yeah, that's fair. I had more gripes just because I had a hard time like keeping the suspension of disbelief there. My mind kept wandering a little bit more during this movie. It just wasn't as... I didn't enjoy it as much as Snow White, for example. So my rating's a little bit lower. I'd probably give it a 5 or a 5.5. I mean, it's not a bad movie or anything like that. It just wasn't quite as entertaining. I just didn't quite enjoy it as much, and these are just arbitrary ratings. So
yeah,
anyway,
we're just making up numbers. We
like,
don't know what we're doing.
We're not basing it off any kind of criteria. It's just 5 was kind of what popped into my mind.
Yeah, kind of average.
Yeah.
Yeah, I got you. Yeah, so it sounds like you liked Snow White better than Pinocchio.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, and I was the other way. I like Pinocchio better than Snow White. So we'll have to keep a ranking of which movies we liked better. Just a running tally of all the Disney movies ranked best to worst.
Yes, I would love to, and then we can occasionally like post our rankings on Instagram or Twitter.
Mm-hmm. That'd be so much fun. Like once we get a few more under our belt, we can like post once a week when we're putting up the new episode. The next day, put our updated ranking or something like that.
That'd be fun.
So let us know if that's something you'd like to see us do in the future.
Surprisingly, we already had a few people write in after last week's episode. Last week we watched Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, and here's what some listeners had to say about it.
Amber wrote in and said, "Hi there, friends. I've really enjoyed listening to your Disney podcasts, and they give me a different perspective on Disney movies I've grown up watching. Perfect to listen to while I work on creating a little bit of magic for people, aka mouse ears. Keep up the good work." From Amber and Tucker. Now, we're friends with Amber, and she has recently started an Etsy shop making Mickey Mouse ears called The Fox and the Tucker Co., because her dog's name is Tucker, so that's the hound from that. So if you want to check out Amber, check out The Fox and the Tucker Co. on Instagram, or her dog, Tucker the Beagle, on Instagram as well.
Yeah, just to be clear, it's Tucker D-A, like David Alpha Beagle, just so you know. Yeah. So her ears are amazing. So I've been wearing them out. We went out today, and I'm going out with wearing my mouse ears and my mask, just what normal people do, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so thank you very much, Amber, for writing in, and we're glad you've been enjoying the show.
Definitely. And Sarah wrote in as well and noted in her message that everyone loves Snow White because she was the first princess in the start of all the movies. But that doesn't mean she's the best. The first of anything is not always the best. Obviously, we wouldn't have the other princesses without her, and I appreciate that, but she's still not in my top favorites. I respect people who like her, but she's just not for me.
Yeah, I kind of agree with you there, Sarah. Snow White was, like I said, it was great for its time, but not really one of my favorite movies. I don't think it really holds up to modern standards.
Yeah, Sarah's also a friend, and so I know she would agree with this statement with me. Snow White's definitely not one of the best as far as the actual movie goes, but like in Once Upon a Time, like she's definitely one of the best characters. Well,
I mean, Sarah's dog is named Snow after Snow White, so I mean, she has some fondness for the character, just maybe not necessarily one of her favorite Disney movies.
Yeah, if I was making a list of my favorite princesses, she's not going to be at the top. She's probably going to be at the bottom, like if I'm being honest as well.
Yeah, so thank you guys for writing in this week. I'm so glad we actually had something to share in this segment of the show. And if you're listening to this, then you can help make next week's listener mail segment of the show just as awesome by writing in your thoughts on Pinocchio. Grace, how can the beautiful people get in touch with us?
Well, the beautiful people and the ugly stepsisters can get in touch with us about...
Sorry. Let's leave that in. I'm literally leaving that in. The reaction. That's hilarious.
Well, I don't want only beautiful people think they can contact us.
That's fair. All of our listeners are beautiful people.
There you know. We are on Twitter and Instagram at Disney Ages, or you can email us at disneyagespodcast@gmail.com.
All of that information is listed in each episode's show notes, so check that out if you forget where to find us. And the songs in this podcast were created by Kevin MacLeod and are used under Creative Commons license. Check the show notes for information and links to find some really awesome free music.
That's all we have for you this week, so check back in next week to hear us discuss Fantasia.
Until next time.
See ya!